Welcome in, everybody. I'm Emma, your host and teacher educator. Today, we're diving into a truly fantastic resource for this explainer. It's the 2024 book Assessment for Language Teaching by Phakiti and Leung. And let me tell you, the reason this book is such a game changer is that it completely shifts our focus. It moves us away from that intense anxiety of just handing out grades and instead forces us to look at the true underlying purpose of why we evaluate our students in the first place. Joining me today to explore this is Jing, a brilliant postgraduate TESOL student who's currently developing her own assessment literacy. Hi, Emma. Yeah, I am so ready to dig into this because honestly, the whole concept of assessment has always felt, well, a little overwhelming to me as a new teacher. Oh, that is a completely normal reaction, Jing. It's a massive responsibility, right? But our goal today is to really demystify the whole thing. We're going to break down how you can use assessment intentionally, keeping your true purpose front and center to actually empower your students rather than just, measure them.
Honestly, that shift in mindset is exactly what I need right now. I actually have my teaching practicum coming up very soon, and my main task is to assess my international students' English speaking ability. I want to do a really good job, and obviously I want to be completely fair, but how do I actually know if they're communicating effectively?
Okay, that is the perfect real-world challenge to frame our entire explainer around today, and I completely understand the anxiety. I remember the very first time I had to grade a speaking test. I practically froze because I was so focused on catching every single little mistake rather than thinking about why I was assessing them to begin with. Knowing your purpose, why you are collecting this information, and what you intend to do with it, that's going to be your guiding light. So we're going to build a practical roadmap together right now so you can walk into that practicum feeling totally prepared.
The absolute first step on this roadmap is developing what Phakiti and Leung call language assessment literacy, or LAL for short. When we look at how LAL is defined, it becomes super clear that assessment is so much more than just knowing how to write test questions.
Right. So LAL is essentially kind of like my professional teacher toolkit. It's the knowledge of how to use different types of assessment, but also having a really deep understanding of the ethics behind those choices.
Exactly. It's the essential framework you need to build that confidence. When you have high assessment literacy, you understand the precise purpose behind every single activity you run in your classroom. And that ethical component you mentioned, it is huge. It doesn't just mean preventing cheating. It means ensuring the decisions you make based on those assessments don't accidentally harm a student's progress. Okay, that makes total sense. But before we get too deep into the weeds, I still find myself getting tripped up on the terminology sometimes. I always kind of use the words testing and assessment interchangeably. Are they literally just two words for the same thing? Oh, you are definitely not alone in that. Almost everyone does. But let's untangle these terms, because doing so actually brings us to our first big takeaway for today. Testing is actually just a very specific, narrow subset of assessment. Think of a test as that grueling 3-hour grammar exam, where everyone is sweating through their shirts in total silence. It uses very standardized procedures to measure something highly specific. Assessment, on the other hand, is much, much broader. It's the continuous, everyday collection of evidence of student learning. Ah, I see. So when I'm just casually walking around the classroom and doing a quick thumbs up or thumbs down check to see if they understand a new vocabulary word, that is assessment? Spot on! Its primary purpose is to act as an ongoing tool for supporting student learning in real time. It's not just about delivering a final, rigid judgment. And understanding that distinction naturally leads us right to the two main categories of assessment purpose: formative and summative.
Jing. Okay, as a language learner myself, I have always dreaded summative assessment. Those are the big, scary final exams at the end of the semester where you just get a number or a letter grade and, well, that's it. But formative assessment, where the teacher gives me detailed, thoughtful comments while I'm still figuring things out, that always felt so much more supportive.
That is a wonderful reflection, Jing. Formative is assessment for learning. Its entire purpose is to improve teaching and learning right in the moment. You'll actually notice the concept of feed forward here, too. That means you aren't just telling students what they did wrong, you're giving them actionable, specific steps to improve on their very next attempt. Summative, meanwhile, is assessment of learning. It measures achievement at the very end of the line. For your speaking class practicum, you'll absolutely need both. You'll use formative feed-forward during practice role plays and a summative evaluation to measure their overall progress at the end.
Now, to actually assess speaking effectively, we have to understand what speaking actually entails. The book introduces a really fascinating socio-cognitive model of language proficiency, which reveals that speaking isn't just about regurgitating memorized grammar rules.
Wow, okay. There is a lot going on in this framework.
It involves their language knowledge, sure, but also things like strategic competence and their affective state?
Yes, it is incredibly dynamic. Let's break that down a bit. When your students speak, they are navigating a highly complex mix of factors. They use strategic competence to mentally plan what they are going to say. But we also have to consider their affective schema, which basically means their emotions and anxiety levels. For instance, if you ask a student to speak about a hobby they passionately love, leveraging their existing world knowledge and positive affect, they will perform significantly better than if you ask them to speak about some abstract topic they have zero connection to. Your purpose in assessing speaking simply has to account for this complex social reality. Okay, but if speaking ability is that deeply complex and so much of it is happening invisibly inside their heads, how in the world am I supposed to actually measure it during my practicum?
That is the golden question. We do it by defining what we call a construct. The absolutely crucial point here is that a construct is an abstract theoretical concept, something like interactional speaking ability, that we cannot physically see. We can't look at a brain and see speaking ability. We have to infer it by observing specific, definable behaviors through carefully designed tasks.
Okay, let me make sure I'm getting this. So I have to take this invisible thing inside their brain and essentially build an activity that forces it out into the open so I can actually hear it and evaluate it.
Precisely. You are giving the invisible construct a visible stage. And here's the kicker. The stage has to match the construct. If your construct is persuasive speaking, the stage shouldn't be a multiple-choice vocabulary quiz, right? The stage has to be a debate or a speech.
And to ensure we actually build the correct stage, we follow a strict step-by-step process of alignment. This brings us to our second big takeaway for today. Alignment between your outcomes, your teaching, and your tasks is absolutely everything.
Okay, so step 1, I define my exact learning outcomes. Step 2, I design my classroom teaching activities to specifically teach those outcomes. And then step 3, I create the assessment tasks based entirely on what we just practiced.
Exactly. The assessment tasks must directly mirror what you taught. I mean, we've all had that totally frustrating experience as students where we study our hearts out for an essay exam, only to walk into the classroom and face 50 hyper-specific true or false questions on historical dates we barely even covered. That is a total failure of alignment. When that happens, the true purpose of the assessment gets completely lost, and students just feel tricked. So once you have an aligned task, you need a fair way to evaluate it. The authors use a brilliant analogy here that I love, the driving test.
Oh, I like this. When you take a driving test, the examiner doesn't compare you to the teenager who tested an hour before you. They just have a checklist of specific criteria. Like, did you check your mirrors? Did you parallel park safely without hitting a cone?
Exactly right. This is called criterion-referenced assessment. Often in education, we see norm-referenced grading, grading on a curve, where students are actually ranked against each other. But that is terrible for language learning. We want everyone to be able to communicate effectively. In your practicum, your purpose is not to find out who is the best speaker in the room. It is to measure each individual student against specific predetermined criteria. Did they meet the standard? It is a vastly fairer approach. Okay, the driving test analogy makes perfect sense. But it does make me wonder, how do I ensure that the specific criteria I create for my speaking test are actually trustworthy in the real world?
That brings us to the very core of the book, the 5 pillars of good assessment. These are the mandatory quality checks you have to apply to literally any test you design. Let's actually define what these mean for your practicum. First is reliability. This is about consistency. If you grade a student's speaking test today, and then listen to the recording and grade it again tomorrow, would you give them the same score? Next is validity. Are you actually measuring their speaking ability, or is your prompt so confusing that you're accidentally measuring their reading comprehension? And practicality? I assume that means, do I actually have the time and resources to pull this off? Exactly. Then we have fairness. Does every single student, regardless of background, have an equal opportunity to succeed? And finally, ethics. What are the real-world consequences of the scores we give? Are we doing no harm?
Now, when you start applying those pillars in real life, you will inevitably face some tension. The most common struggle for teachers is balancing validity against practicality.
Right, so validity means the test accurately measures the exact speaking construct I want. But practicality is about my limited time. So for maximum validity, I might want to conduct a deeply comprehensive 30-minute speaking interview with every single student.
Right, but if you have 30 students, that's 15 hours of testing. You simply do not have the time. So practicality dictates you might only have time for a 5-minute paired role play during class.
You constantly have to balance the ideal purpose of the assessment with the constraints of your reality. A really great actionable tip here is to use highly targeted rubrics or structured peer assessment. This allows students to get valid, meaningful feedback without requiring impossible amounts of one-on-one teacher time.
The book actually challenges us to consider which of these quality criteria we might prioritize depending on our unique teaching context. If you had to choose just one of those pillars to really anchor your focus on for your international students, Jing, which would it be? Oh, for me, it undoubtedly has to be fairness. My students come from entirely different educational cultures and linguistic backgrounds. I have to provide equitable support so that no one is at a disadvantage simply because of their cultural context. I want my assessment to genuinely and honestly reflect their learning, not their background. Beautifully said. And that actually establishes our third big takeaway for today. True quality in assessment is impossible without strict adherence to fairness, ethics, and validity. You simply cannot achieve your educational purpose without them. This paramount need for fairness is highlighted by a very weighty quote mentioned in the text by Bernard Spolsky. He says, "Tests, like guns, are potentially so powerful as to be commonly misused."
Wow, okay, that is an incredibly intense metaphor, but it makes sobering sense. A poorly designed test or an unfair grade can completely crush a student's motivation.
It really, really can. Consider a real-world example. A student takes a poorly designed, invalid placement test and gets inappropriately sorted into a beginner language class. They become bored, they lose their confidence, and eventually they drop the language entirely. That one misused test literally altered their entire academic trajectory. It highlights the profound ethical responsibility we hold as teachers. Every single time we evaluate, we wield power. Our purpose must always be to uplift, to guide, and to accurately measure, never to gatekeep unjustly. So, as we wrap up this explainer today, let's firmly cement the 3 core lessons from Phakiti and Leung's work. First, assessment is not just a final exam, it's a broad, continuous, ongoing tool whose ultimate purpose is to support learning.
Second, alignment is absolutely everything. My learning outcomes, my classroom teaching, and my assessment tasks must match perfectly. No trick questions allowed.
Exactly. And third, quality requires strict fairness, ethics, and validity. If you keep the true, supportive purpose of these 3 takeaways at the very front of your mind, Jing, your teaching practicum is going to be incredibly successful. Jing, thank you so much for this. I honestly feel a profound shift in my confidence for this practicum. I am no longer looking at assessment as just some mandatory grading chore. I'm actually seeing it as a critical tool to understand and empower my students' progress. I am absolutely thrilled to hear that, Jane. You are going to be a phenomenal educator. And for everyone joining us in this explainer, I want to leave you with this question. How will you shift your perspective to use assessment as a tool to empower your students today? Because when we align our assessments with our true purpose, we aren't just measuring our students, we are setting them up for lifelong success. Keep learning and keep empowering.